take a moment and think back to a time when you earned your own money, that first job, that first task, that first errand that awarded you some coins or some dollars. Remember that feeling? That feeling where, I did that. Now, there's lots of reasons to work. There's lots of motivators to work, and money's not that only motivator. But there was just something about that first earning that got you a sense of satisfaction that your efforts were recognized in a different way. I remember my first award for that effort that was recognized in that exchange of simple employment, but it earned me the best $10 bill I have ever seen. And I knew precisely what I was going to do with that $10 bill. I had my eyes on the best pair of light pink leg warmers that 1981 could afford. And I put them on, and they were with my second-hand ballet slippers and my second-hand dance outfit, but those leg warmers were mine. Now, we know as part of the human experience, we wouldn't still be around if there wasn't some effort and some work involved. Work is not new to the human experience. But we've also seen in the last couple of 100 years this process of seeing what this exchange for effort and employment really looks like. And what does that mean? I have spent my career fascinated by how we put people and organizations and how they interface together. I've looked at that role of work within society, understanding that it gives us structure and connectedness, and there's honor in all type of work. And yet how we do that when we come together, whether it's 2 employees or 200 employees or 20,000 employees, in order to accomplish desired results. As an organizational psychologist, I continue to look at the data and walk alongside hundreds of people, trying to figure out what does this relationship look like when we spend 30 and 40% of our adulthood in this exchange for making a living. I would also suspect not only do you have your first memory of earning your first few dollars, but you also had some pictures growing up in your mind about what work might look like. I remember some sci-fi images and some cartoons in my world only on Saturday mornings that showed me what it would be like to adult, what it would be like to go to work and actually earn that exchange. I envisioned some flying cars. I thought it would be push-button easy. And yet, we also know today that as all of us have prepared to figure out how do we support ourselves in this life, how do we adult even better by understanding that our efforts within organizations are part of this exchange. When you think forward to what that image would be, what that job would be like, what did you picture? And yet we also know that most of our human life in this day and age always interacts with some benefit or some exchange as part of an organization. Most of us were born into an organization. We were educated by organizations. And will we be cared by those people who occupy those organizations? And so it is this interaction that I continue to be fascinated by, about how we bring people together to try and accomplish this desired result, whether you're a one-person office, you're a 50-person company, or you're trying to add your next 1,000 people of expansion, whether it is locally, regionally, or internationally. I also have looked at where we have come to understand this unknown that we are going into. And humans have not always been good to humans. I don't think that's a new issue. And we've struggled because when we moved from the farms in the pre-industrial age to the phases of the industrial age, we had to decide who would work, how we would work, and under what conditions would we work. We had to organize and decide who would be in charge and what did this work look like and in what exchange, at what level would we be paid for that exchange. Many of us have also experienced the ongoing phenomena that has happened in business for the last 120 years. And it sounds like this. Open office plans, closed office plans. Open office plans. We have been building and taking down walls and changing workspaces consistently for about 120 years. And yet we also know that while humans have been amazingly, have that potential for compassion and caring and honoring, we also have not done this as well as we could have for the last 120 years of modern business history. We also know that we have harmed and we have hurt. We have discriminated, we have harassed. We have not taken good care of the people who entrusted us with this exchange. What I also know is that today we have more potential than ever to understanding what that relationship looks like. We have more data than we've ever had before. We have new understanding that we need every single person engaged in this process to create the organizations that give us the opportunity to pursue our interests beyond and outside of work. We've also come to understand that we need people of all different abilities, and we are more interconnected now than we ever have been. And yet we also recognize that within the influence of artificial intelligence and other types of technologies, us as people have to show up in this relationship, in this work, differently. So we have some questions we need to take on about what this future of work looks like. What we know is even in the past, even just a few years before I donned those pink leg warmers, there was many, but I saw one. In a back old storage cabinet in an office we were moving around, there was a crinkled up paper from a 1972 personnel handbook that reminded me that just a few years before I put on those leg warmers, it was still legal to write this in a U.S. piece of paper in this exchange for an employment. And that said, if you get pregnant, you're fired. So we've made some progress. We understand that in this modern business age of 120 years, we've learned some things. And yet, potentially, in this exchange of a chunk of our adult life that impacts so many other things we do when we're not at work, we've got some potential to figure out how do we do this better. And yet, I still get a little concerned that this might be the most recognized graphic around organizations today because in the last 120 years, we've tried to figure out who does what. And a lot of the methods and methodologies we've been teaching haven't changed. And yet we have more collaboration, more creative thinking, more contributions to see things differently, to look at the data and figure out how they apply. So today I want you to consider this. What does this future world of work look like? What kinds of effort will you put in for this exchange? I've sat with thousands of people in conversations Whether it's been from a construction field to a hospital to a school, all different types in the U.S., outside of the U.S., small organizations and large organizations, trying to figure out, with this understanding, this insight, and the learning we should be gleaming from the last years of learning, what does this look like in the employment of the future? I was taught a lesson by a young machinist who came in to interview for a position. And he had just recently finished his certification to be able to run computer-aided machinery in this organization. And he was asked the very HR question, what would you like to be doing with us 5 years from now? And the young candidate looked back at the 3 people interviewing him and said, you haven't invented it yet. Best answer ever, just saying. But here's why. Of course, there was a follow-up question like, tell us more. What do you mean? And he paused and he said, you know what? I need a job as a machinist. That is my qualification. That is what I can do for you. And I can do that well. But 5 years from now, you don't know what your customers are going to expect. You don't know what technologies are in place. And I'll help you figure it out. There is a lesson for all of us in that. There is a lesson to the point that we don't know what that future looks like. But we also need to create organizations that have the responsibility to make sure that we're ready, that we have leaders in place to bring out the best in people and not drive results in spite of them. I've had countless conversations over my last 27 years as I've looked at this and I've worked in it and I've asked questions about it, all to earn that living, to be able to take care of my responsibilities when I was not working. And the conversations have been about leadership and motivation and communication and change, power, politics, emotional well-being, all these things that we wrap up into this employment relationship, along with driving business results. There's a partnership here, though, that I want us to explore today. That while we don't know what our customers are going to want 5 years from now, we also have a responsibility to show up as we make our contributions, to understand how that individual and that organization will continue to interface. And we do. We have some new technologies we didn't see coming, which has also pushed us as people showing up to work to have to add value differently. Because when the technology and the AI now take over some of the risk or some of the mundane, we know that there's honor in work, but the work looks different. So what does that mean for us? While I'm fascinated by the fact that organizations are really just groups of people who come together for a common purpose, and we figure out, based on that org chart, who does what. And yet, we know that any organization, profit, nonprofit, government, non-government, all the different kinds of structures and designs we put in place still are made up of people. And we have a renewed opportunity. And I would propose to you that from pre-industrial to multiple phases of industrial to digital and information age, we are primed for what I believe should be the human potential age. That we haven't even seen yet what we are fully capable of doing. But it's going to take some learning from the past to understand how we engage a new type of organization and yet recognize this exchange of contributions for inducements. I believe that as organizations figure out how to navigate that, we have 3 steps, maybe 3 calls to action for us showing up to work. And what are those things we'll need to be ready for, just like that young machinist reminded of us, that we don't know what's coming down the road. Number 1, I do believe we have an opportunity for an age of innovation. And some authors have proposed that this next stage is really the age of innovation, but I believe that is incomplete. But in our modern organizations, in more collaboration and connection than ever before, this is not about easy street and just pushing a button. We're going to have to dig in. We're going to even have to work harder. It's just going to look different. We can't measure new ideas unless we get something done, or we won't thrive. In fact, the organizations that I see today that are having a hard time surviving don't recognize the combination of new ideas and people and how they come together. They're not leading well, they're not communicating. And so it is a combination of innovation, productivity, and yet still incomplete without accountability. As leaders and organizations, we have to be held to a higher standard. We need to take responsibility over this entity that we have been entrusted with, because that will ultimately drive results. It'll help us compete in a global network where collaboration and the ability to make and remake organizations will remain one of the key central components to how we keep thriving. And accountability is not just on organizations and on leaders, but it's on each and every one of us. That if we sign up, we need to show up. And it's not just showing up and being there, it's being actively involved with the intentions of providing our contributions in exchange for that pay, in order to think about how will we do this together. I believe we are uniquely positioned. History's always had opportunities and revelations and different stages. But we have a neat combination of factors together today to say, you know what, moving forward, we want to thrive. And it's going to take everybody to make that happen and to have some conversations around innovative thinking. How do we get this done? And showing up to do it. That's going to help drive what I believe should be the age of human potential. Thank you very much.